But then IT can build a business architecture without help from the business. That doesn't happen. We know a little bit about the business. Sometimes we know a little more about the business. But when we start building a capability map with an enterprise architecture team, we know we need to quickly engage with the business subject matter experts. They might be able to create an initial level 1 capability map and maybe a little bit below that as a starting point, and that's fine. But to go deeper, we don't have the business knowledge that the business people have. So we have to engage with them. The business architecture capability map is the deliverable. First, I should say that the business architecture is not the main deliverable. The deliverable is the ability to provide improvements and insights to everything from planning to portfolio management to requirements definition to IT architecture definition to solution delivery. We'll look later at how the business architecture engages with all these areas. But importantly, the capability map is not the only piece. It's a very important piece, but we need the other pieces around it, as we talked about earlier. Oops, wrong button. The business architecture is complicated. It's not a complicated set of concepts. The difficulty with building a capability map is more around knowing what the terms are and how to define the terms, not the fact that you have level decompositions. If you do IT architecture, or you have backgrounds in other skills like BPMN, you probably are working in a more sophisticated technology or operating model. In reality, with business architecture, value streams, fairly straightforward. Capabilities, fairly straightforward. Information maps, fairly straightforward. They're not that difficult. Connecting the parts, not very difficult. If you have the knowledge of the business necessary to do it. If you don't have the knowledge of the business, then business architecture seems hard. But the practice and the discipline itself is not a complicated discipline. That there's no common approach. Well, there is a common approach to business architecture. You can go and read a number of different things. We'll give you some reference points at the end of the session today where you can look them up. There's both public and then association-based information you can get. There's a very standardized approach. The Business Architecture Guild, which again is a not-for-profit association, it just develops content. They're members of the Open Group, so working to influence TOGAF. They're members of the OMG, the Object Management Group, working to get to a common meta model to manage business architecture. So working with the standards associations. In order to do that type of work, you have to have a very good foundation for how business architecture works. And that's very, very important. And we're starting to see now that the standards organizations are beginning to adopt these concepts. The first thing produced from the Open Group was something called the Capability Guide. You'll see that the Capability Guide from the Open Group aligns very much to what we're going to be talking about and covering today. The next thing they're working on is the Value Stream Guide. You'll see when that's done that guide will align very much to the way we're talking about value streams today, including connecting value streams to capabilities. So this standard approach is now being explored and documented within the standards groups, and you can only do that when there's a set of very good best practices that have been clearly documented. So it is now a much more common approach and standardized approach. Another myth number 5, business architecture is program, project, or business area specific. It's not done for just a project or just a business area. The use of business architecture is only as good as the area or the ecosystem you define it in. If I have one business unit with a business architecture, it doesn't mean I can't use it beyond there. I can't use it to communicate with other groups. If each group has its own business architecture, then it's like everybody is using a different view of the business, and it's very difficult to connect things. The power of business architecture is to see broadly across the business. The strength of business architecture is to see what's going on, not just across the business as work moves from place to place and business unit to business unit, but also to see what the external engagement is with our stakeholders, our partners, potentially other agencies and so forth. So that is also very important. The business architecture can be licensed or acquired. There are reference models being developed for certain industries. That's going to take some time. There's some early work coming out next month on reference models from the Business Architecture Guild. But you can't go out and just buy a business architecture for your business, because your business, each business is unique. So you have to actually ensure that it aligns to your terminology, your view of end-to-end stakeholder value, your view of the information, your organizational structure. Also, having somebody come in with a business architecture or try to build it for you without having a good understanding of the business is not something that's easily done. Business architecture really needs to be built internally within the organization, and external people can mentor, facilitate, coach, help do all those exercises. And that's very, very important, because most organizations don't have a lot of strong business architecture skills. But the knowledge about the business is in the business, and that's who we have to work with to do the work. So the external parties, that's the role that we would all play in helping move these things along, and interpreting and using the business architecture, which is the bigger piece of the practice. How do I use it to build the data architectures? How do I use it to influence solution architectures? Myth number 7, that it's an IT discipline. It really is a business discipline. We do see it established in enterprise architecture teams, but just as often in many organizations, we happen to see it in the business side. Export Development Canada has their business architecture team set up on the business side. The U.S. Patent and Trademark Office sets up their business architecture on the business side. And we see that across many different organizations. However, we do have to tie it to IT architecture. Myth number 8, that it's expensive. Business architecture is not that expensive. You're not investing in large hardware or software investments. There are some tools that you can use. If you already have enterprise architecture tools, you can probably use those. There is some lightweight tooling that you can use for doing just the business architecture pieces, but it's not a big investment in tooling. And in terms of people, it doesn't take a lot of people to build a good business architecture. They just have to understand the approach and be able to engage with the business. Businesses do not need business architecture because they already understand all they need to know about the business. That's generally not true. The top doesn't know what's happening 2 layers down. This group doesn't know what's happening with this group. It always amazes me how little people in one area know about what's going on with people in another area. You find that out when you bring these people together working on a capability map, and they get into arguments because they don't see things the same way. So we discover that along the way. And finally, that business architecture is just business analysis, which is not true. It helps with business analysis, but business analysis builds good business requirements. Business architecture builds and deploys and uses business architecture.